All right, let's get started. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the very first event of the Georgetown Cyberlaw Society. We're all glad that you can join us, and it's great to see everyone's beautiful faces this afternoon. We're really excited to start this event. We will have some people trickling in to join us, so welcome, and thank you for coming. A few words about the Cyberlaw Society. We are a group at Georgetown Law that focuses on examining issues in law, technology, and really the future of our society. And today we have a very special kickoff event to talk about cyber law and the day-to-day practice of cyber law. So for those of you who are interested in technology law, or perhaps those interested in a career, you did come to the right place. I've posted in the chat a link to our website so you can see more about our group, get involved in our mailing list, and see our future events. Without further ado, let's kick off our event with our two incredible speakers from Sidley Austin. Would you guys like to introduce yourself to the group?
Colleen, you want to go ahead?
Sujit, you first or me first?
Please, Colleen, go ahead.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Colleen Brown. I'm a partner in the DC office of Sidley in the privacy and cybersecurity practice. I have been at Sidley my entire career. I actually started as a summer associate, particularly interviewed with Sidley because I wanted to be in a privacy practice. And back then, there were actually not a lot of firms that had privacy practices. We're one of the oldest, and you know, went straight from Penn and the summer associate program straight in and started as an associate and kind of went straight through. So I'm a bit of a Sidley lifer. Part of the reason I'm a Sidley lifer is because I love the privacy and cyber practice. These issues and the people who work in it, you know, are just so interesting, wonderful colleagues, wonderful topics, wonderful, interesting issues working on for clients. And so, yeah, so that is how I have spent my career. I like to tell people that I'm actually a data lawyer. I'm in the privacy and cyber practice, but really what it is being a data lawyer because we follow the data. And what that means is, you know, I'm not just a regulatory counselor. I'm not, you know, just a litigator or even a transactional attorney or a policy kind of lawyer. We actually are everything because you follow the data and our clients' data needs really are varying. So one of the things I love about this area of law, at least for my practice, is that it allows me to kind of be every kind of lawyer. In terms of the skill set, you know, you utilize all the different skills you could have as a lawyer while focused on a particular area, which is data and the privacy laws and the cybersecurity laws, and a little bit, you know, on the trade secret and intellectual property side of the house, you know, that go with it. So I being the private sector lifer and law firm lifer, I'm really happy to have my colleague Sujit, who's had a much more interesting career path than me, and I'll let him introduce himself now.
Well, thanks, Colleen. That is not the case, but it is wonderful to be here with all of you today. And Colleen, it's so nice to invite me to join her on this, and Alana, thank you for the invitation as well. So as Colleen said, she's been a lifer at Sidley. It's built just a tremendous practice on the cyber and data front. I came from the government. I joined Sidley about 3 months ago in October of 2020, after about a dozen years at the Justice Department. So I do have a very different background in terms of my experience. I did start my career at a private law firm. I was not lucky enough to go to Georgetown Law School, although I do live about a block away. So you know, it's a beautiful part of town. But I graduated law school in 2005, started my career at a law firm. I was in the white collar criminal investigations group at the old Hogan and Hartson firm, which is now Hogan Lovells here in DC. And then I went to the government. I became an assistant US attorney in early 2009. I spent about 8 years doing that work. I was in the District of Maryland and had a really varied career as a prosecutor. You know, did a number of white collar cases, public corruption cases, which were really my specialty and my sort of favorite area of the law. Ultimately became the chief appellate lawyer in that office. So had sort of district-wide responsibilities for supervising litigation in the Fourth Circuit and the Court of Appeals. And then spent about 3.5 years at Main Justice at headquarters, where I served as Associate Deputy Attorney General. And my job was to help oversee the cyber portfolio at the Justice Department. So I worked for the AG and the Deputy AG in really all of the work that the department did on the one hand, investigations and prosecutions. That was about 50% of my role. And the other half was policy. So working on matters as diverse as cryptocurrency, facial recognition technology, encryption, data transfers between Europe and the United States, all from a policy perspective. And so I'm happy to talk more about my time in government. I would definitely encourage each of you to think about a career in public service. But for me, the timing was sort of right to come back to the private sector. And Sidley was, I mean, candidly, shoulders above all the other law firms I was interested in, which is not to knock any other firm. I mean, there are so many great firms in DC and frankly around the country that work on technology and cyber issues. But for me, the practice that Colleen and others have created at Sidley was the right place for me. So I joined about 3 months ago. And again, as our conversation goes forward, I'm happy to talk more about what I work on day to day and my experiences that I brought to the firm before I came here.
Thank you, Sujit. And I want to add that, you know, a key thing of the harmony in Sujit's background, which, you know, was so important to our practice, was those cybersecurity issues. And those are things that the government is working on intensely, of course, but also private sector is working on, oftentimes in parallel, sometimes together. And so those skills, those litigation and investigatory skills and kind of a fluency in cybersecurity threat issues is something that really translates to a wide variety of lawyering and potential career options you can have. And that's on the government side, that's on, you know, in the law firm side, that's very much also in the in-house side for companies. It's also in kind of the consulting side. There's lots of lawyers in the consulting and cybersecurity industry, which has truly exploded. So, you know, these tech issues, these data issues, these cybersecurity issues, especially, which have a little bit of an overlay that's increasing on national security matters, because frankly, that's where the threats are often, you know, there's that strain coming through on the threats. It is a great sort of career opportunity that opens a lot of different doors. And so oftentimes when you speak with lawyers that do this kind of work, they don't usually look like me sitting in one place for 13, 14 years. People usually hop around because the opportunity is there and there's different perspectives and different things to do in this area as a lawyer, which is really exciting. So please go ahead, Alana. We're ready for your panel questions.
I have to say, a lot of people who are joining this call and will be watching later are first-year students. So hearing about both of your careers and backgrounds, it's giving us a light at the end of the tunnel as we endure these doctrinal classes. So thank you for getting us all excited. The first question we wanted to ask both of you is a question that a lot of our viewers have, which is very basic, so it seems, but a great place to start, which is, what is cyber law? So either of you feel free to take up that hopefully fun intro question.
Well, I'll take a shot because my answer will not be particularly good. I'm sure Colleen's will be much better. So cyber law, I would say, actually doesn't exist, right? There is no kind of unitary idea of cyber law. The beautiful thing about cyber law is that it's a kind of conglomeration of so many different interesting disciplines. It's constitutional law to some extent, Fourth Amendment issues, sometimes First Amendment issues, like, you know, Section 230 and those issues. It's trade law. You know, digital trade is very much an issue right now. And sort of counseling, you know, we have to counsel our clients about how do you structure your business so that you can, you know, transfer data across parts of the world where you might have competing trade regimes. It's privacy law, right? Not only constitutional sort of privacy laws, but also statutory privacy law, state law, international law. It's diplomacy to some extent. You've got different nation states that have different public policy, you know, priorities that you've got to try to reconcile. There's a part of it that's, you know, technology, pure technology law. You've got to deal with IP and patents and, you know, making sure that there's interoperability between different regulatory regimes. It's conflicts of law, because exactly for the reason that I just said, you know, Europe might have one particular conception of privacy law. The United States might have another, and even within the United States, different states might have different perspectives. You know, as a counselor, your job is to help your clients navigate all of those different issues. So, I mean, I haven't even scratched the surface, but that's what I find exciting about cyber law, is that it's not a unitary discipline. It really has so many different pieces to it that you can find your home in this area, even though, like Colleen and I have very different backgrounds in terms of what we've been doing for the last 10 years. But yet here we are as partners in the same law firm, working on the same clients, often referring matters to one another because we've got that commonality of background. So I'll stop there. Colleen, I'm sure, has a much better answer.
No, I think that was perfect. I completely agree with everything Suja just said. And one thing I will also say is, who needs cyber lawyers? What kind of client needs cyber lawyers? And today, literally every company needs cyber lawyers, because every company is a technology company nowadays. Which has been really a fun revolution in the last 10 years or so. You had the awakening. There have always been tech companies for many years, but you've had an awakening in the last 10 years where companies that didn't really think of themselves as a technology company now are, they are revolutionizing, digitizing their businesses in ways where they themselves view themselves as a technology company, and technology companies need cyber lawyers.
And it's also a great title because, right, think about it. You go and you ask somebody, hey, what kind of law do you practice? They say tax, that's the end of the conversation. But I'm sure with cyber law, you've got a lot of eyebrows and a lot of interesting looks. So to give a lot of the students who are listening on this call more perspective, I know you guys both have mentioned some of the issues that you work on. But if you can, take us through a day in the life of a cyber lawyer, or the kind of cases you worked on, or the issues that excite you.
Day in the life, man. Varied. Today I started out talking with the general counsel about a regulatory investigation with one particular financial regulator that is really into cybersecurity issues and has cybersecurity regulation. There's an alphabet soup of regulators. So there is an enforcement investigation and defense that we're working on. So chatting with that GC who's about to go talk to the board about, what this investigation might hold for the company. After that, I was on a diligence call for a merger of a company in a certain sector where I helped with the privacy and cybersecurity diligence. So I was talking to the company, the buyer, our client, about what this acquisition could mean. What are the privacy and cyber risks if they invest in this company that could be realized that might impact their investment? After that, I was on a readout with a third-party consultant who I worked with a client to do a HIPAA risk assessment. So it's a client that's becoming a business associate under HIPAA, is going to start receiving health information for some AI analytics. And in order to do that, they had to become a business associate. So we helped them prepare that risk assessment to be compliant with HIPAA. So I was dealing with security and health data issues. After that, I was on another deal call. After that, I was on a call to discuss privilege issues for a production and an investigation. After that, I was on a call with a self-regulatory organization who's thinking about submitting comments to a notice of proposed rulemaking about the banking regulations' new breach reporting standards. They want to expand data breach reporting to the banking regulators. They want it to happen much faster than normal. And so we're going to prepare some comments for the regulatory process, admin law process there. After that, I was on a witness interview to talk about the privacy officer for a company that is under a corporate integrity agreement and compliance, their compliance program. And now I'm talking to you guys. And then after that, I will actually get to have some work time done to get a bunch of client deliverable memos out. Extremely varied. You heard me talk about investigations. You heard me talk about deal work where we are transactional lawyers, sort of governance issues with board reporting, administrative law policy making issues, investigatory regulatory work, again, on that side. And later tonight, I will also be on a call about a data breach where we are about to start work on the forensic side. So it hits everything. Sujit, what are you doing today?
Yeah, no, very similar. I mean, I was just thinking through it, Colleen, as you were saying. I mean, very similar. So, earlier today, we have a client that is under investigation by various regulatory agencies, including the Justice Department. And so they wanted some counseling about how to deal with some of the incoming. And so we'll be representing them on that matter. And so, sort of talking through, anytime the Justice Department starts knocking on your door, people tend to get a little bit freaked out. So a lot of it is sort of helping people understand what the process might look like, what some of the end results might be, and you've got to be candid with the client about where things might potentially go and how we as lawyers are there to help protect their interests while also keeping the government sort of appropriately informed. So that was the first conversation I had today. After that, completely different set of issues. We're assisting a client, as I mentioned earlier, think through some of the implications of recent digital trade agreements. There's been a recent agreement between the EU and the UK. There's one between UK and Japan. With the new administration here in the United States, there's certainly some motivation to negotiate a deal both with the EU and with the UK. So you've got the sort of Venn diagram going. And each of those agreements have slightly different provisions. And so our client was sort of, from a policy perspective, asking us, like, how should we be thinking about these issues? Who are some of the people in the government we should be talking to? Because these were negotiations I helped lead when I was in the government. Sort of, what are some of the push points that, let's say, the European Union might have in mind when they're thinking about negotiating through some of these issues? So this is also obviously at a very high level, but those are the kinds of policy issues that I was advising on earlier today. After that, we are in the middle of a very interesting M&A transaction where we represent a company that's looking to purchase another company. And so as part of that diligence process, as Colleen mentioned at the outset, privacy and cyber issues have now taken over. In every transaction now, there's a very significant privacy and cyber security component. And I didn't mention that at the outset. Transactional work is now increasingly a significant part of my own workload. And it's not something I had any exposure to, when I was in the government, let alone, in law school. And so we had a call with the client about thinking through. We haven't, gotten all the information we need in a particular context, and so we were sort of thinking ways through of making sure that we get the information that we need, and sort of helping the client understand some of those issues and think about how to appropriately engage with the other side. And then, as Colleen knows, just earlier today, our firm was retained in a pretty significant data breach that happened yesterday. And so I'll be working on that tonight because you've got to concretely get the client on board, get the engagement letter done, get all the kind of mechanics of law practice done, which is important because you have to establish a privilege. You've got to sort of do the paperwork, and then we're going to immediately dive in and help this company deal with a pretty significant data breach. So, I mean, literally that happened this morning. And as Colleen said, every day is an adventure. I mean, every day, literally in this area, you've got, a whole different set of issues. That's what I think makes it exciting.
You could not have planned a more perfect transition to the next question, which is that it is a dynamic field. It's always changing. What have you noticed has been the largest change since you've been practicing, and kind of where do you see issues in cyber law going, especially because I'm sure in law school, it wasn't the hot topic. A lot of people were saying, oh, I want to be cyber lawyers. Now we're just starting to see classes and concentrations in cyber law. So where have we changed the most? Where are we headed?
I'd say that one of the biggest changes over the past decade plus is the number of people doing this. And you're right. When I was a first year associate, I came in and I said, I want to be a privacy lawyer. I want to do these issues. And my mentors were like, Colleen, you need to meet some other people and try some other things because you can't have a whole career on this privacy thing. And then back in the 90s, when Alan Rawls started this practice at Sidley, people, kind of poked fun at Alan and his internet law practice. Okay, Alan, you go with that Y2K stuff, sure. But, it was huge and it has grown. And I don't think anyone anticipated the explosive growth and the fast pace of growth in this field. And so that's one thing. And what does that mean? Well, that means that, a lot of people do have more specialized areas within cyber law. than perhaps, a decade ago. If you were doing these issues, you handled everything, and to a certain extent, we still do. But for some of the younger lawyers, they really want to focus in on, say, health law, digital health issues, and privacy and cyber issues in health, the health space, or they want to focus really in on kind of national security stuff, and telecom issues, and there's so much there. And so you can actually dive into things like that, and kind of specialize within. And I guess the other trend really is that every potential company is a potential client in this space, because now everybody thinks of themselves as a tech lawyer or a tech company, and data is now the asset that is often most important for a lot of entities. Data is the new currency. It's the new asset. And there are new rules just being written on how we deal with that new thing, because it's not really just like intellectual property, and it's not really like regular property. There's some quasi-ownership issues. There's some sort of ethics of data issues that are very complex and unsettled. And we are in that place where I think the entire legal community internationally is in the process of discerning, what is data as an asset? What does it mean for commercial relationships, for consumer rights? And that's really interesting, exciting, and dynamic, and very much unsettled.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, the only thing I would add is, as Colleen mentioned, this area did not exist when we were in law school. And so I'm really jealous of you guys, because you've got this field that already now exists, but it's still waiting to be shaped, right? And you are at the very, front end of that. If there's one redeeming, virtue of being old, it's that when we come to these issues, people like myself and Colleen bring a, training from a slightly different era. I know we sound like old fogies here, but, the principles that we sort of apply to our the issues that we're confronting today. As a lawyer, you're trained to reason by analogy, right? And so that's why I think as someone like myself, who started off as a prosecutor, did very little with actually data or privacy issues until relatively late in my career as an assistant U.S. attorney. But then suddenly those issues started coming up, very, very quickly. I litigated a case involving the constitutionality of the government seizing or seeking historical cell location information, right? Now, that technology was pretty cool and relatively novel when it arose, and my agents wanted to go get it, right? Because they wanted to build cases against criminals who had done really bad things. That issue ultimately went to the Supreme Court in Carpenter. I had helped litigate that issue all the way up from the district court and up to the Court of Appeals. Ultimately, it had to go en banc because the Fourth Circuit initially kicked it back, and we had to sort of relitigate it. But litigating those issues, you were analogizing to cases from the 1970s, cases that I'm sure all of you have read. Miller and the other business records case, whose name I forget. So even though this is a field that's rapidly expanding, it builds off legal concepts that have been around for a long time. But as Colleen mentioned, there are unique twists in a lot of the sort of new property ideas where traditional analog ways of thinking of things don't work. And that's where I think you guys are just uniquely positioned, because you've got the strong legal training in traditional legal concepts, but you understand the technology in a way that often many of our judges, and frankly, even people of my vintage, don't quite understand because it's native for you. And so you're able to think creatively about these issues while applying the traditional legal concepts. That's why I think the world, frankly, is open for you, because you guys are just perfectly positioned to have the best of both worlds.
I have to tell you, Sujit, our listeners are going to think that we pre-planned this, because each of your comments perfectly sets up to my next pre-planned question. And
well, I used to do a lot of work with the NSA, so
all makes sense now.
That's a joke. That's a joke.
But this is the last segment I have for you both before we open it up to our audience, who I'm sure is very eager with excellent questions for both of you. But the last thing is right about our current legal education. Most of us are first-year students in Georgetown. Some of us are upperclassmen, and we're thinking about which kind of classes should we be really focusing on, or elective classes. So do you have any suggestions of which kind of core legal classes or extracurriculars to take? Addition, any reading suggestions?
If you have the ability to take classes that introduce you to these laws and concepts, I would absolutely do that. So you understand really what you like. And having a fluency when you start work in these laws and concepts is definitely helpful. I think it's helpful for you to market yourself, to be able to say, I took these classes, I really am serious in these issues, and that differentiates you from someone who kind of like to try it out. And so I think that's helpful. You learn to be a lawyer on the job, though, not in law school. And so I wouldn't sweat if you can't get into X, Y, and Z class. There's a lot of opportunities for clinics and for, certain work outside of law school to get that experience, to write articles on this stuff, to show that you want to do this sort of stuff and get your feet wet. But you really learn more afterwards. I would also say that, all the basics are important because, as I just said, when you do this kind of law, you could do it in many different ways. And so your core curriculum is really important. Beyond that, for me, my philosophy in law school was I took any class that was something and the law. Uh, which is, they weren't always the most challenging classes, but they were the most interesting to me. So one thing I would say is I loved law school. I truly did. And, part of being a happy lawyer is pursuing the things that excite you. So if you want to take a class and it's random, whatever, take it. Now is your opportunity to continually stimulate your creative juices, your intellectual curiosity. You have this once in a lifetime opportunity at this fabulous institution to learn, a whole bunch of things. So if it interests you, take it. And I wouldn't sweat it all too much. But Sujit may have a different perspective.
Yeah, it's funny because I was not a huge fan of law school. I'll be perfectly honest. It felt a little abstract to me. It felt a little academic. You'd read specific cases out of a case book, which only stand for a particular proposition. And I just wasn't one of those people who immediately saw the entire thing. And I think people who are able to see the entire thing more quickly than others tend to enjoy law school more because they just get it, right? For me, I always felt like, well, why am I reading this random case about, whatever it is, the hairy hand? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Who cares, right? And it takes time to sort of figure out exactly how everything fits together. I was very lucky that, once I started practicing law, I was able to very quickly find areas that I really enjoyed and really immerse myself. And that's where the legal training came in, right? To this day, I can't really tell you anything that I really learned in law school that was useful, except maybe Fed courts, just because, that's such a cool area. And as a litigator, it comes up, every day. But I was a prosecutor for many years. I took one criminal law class in law school. It was great, whatever, right? What was useful for me, I will tell you though, I took trial advocacy and I took evidence. And as a trial lawyer, both of those were actually really important. Not only because, substantively that's good to know, although you'll get a lot of on-the-job training. It actually helped me in the interview because when I was interviewing to be an assistant U.S. attorney, people look at your transcripts and they're less concerned about what your grades were because, you're at a great law school. You're obviously very smart. You'll be fine on that front. But if you're interviewing to be a prosecutor, people want to see that you want to be a trial lawyer, that you've actually demonstrated an interest in those kinds of skills. So my suggestion would be, just to echo Colleen, substantively, take what you like. Look at stuff that you find interesting, and I wouldn't be too strategic about it. Just do what you like. Because at the end of the day, what you learn substantively is really not going to have a huge impact on your career anyway. What is important is that you build the tools and the skills. If there are clinicals, which I'm sure Georgetown offers, I don't know what it's like in COVID time, but if you can get out and meet real clients and do it in an ethically appropriate way, what a great experience. Because you will immediately see that all the abstract stuff you're learning in your case books, yeah, that's great. But when it comes time to like writing up a contract or helping someone in landlord-tenant court, that's real. And that in many ways is the most kind of useful education you can get out of law school, because it practically trains you. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and I was going to add one more thing. If there's one thing that you can focus and through your time in law school, see if you can truly improve, it's writing. Whatever kind of lawyering you do, you have to be a good writer, and the best writers, distinguish themselves in any kind of area of law. So any opportunities you have to improve your writing, take it. And that's actually a lifelong pursuit.
And the last question that I have for you before we open it up for our audience. So audience, pay attention. This is your last opportunity to come up with your groundbreaking questions. Is what is your favorite part of being a cyber lawyer, aside from telling people that you are a cyber lawyer, which in and of itself is very cool?
I like we've touched on this. I like the diversity of the practice. Somebody, I think you might have made the joke about tax lawyers at the beginning. And look, there are people who are really passionate about tax law, and they are really good at subsection 2743B of the tax code, and that's their life's mission, and they save their clients millions of dollars, and that's all great. And for people who are like that, that's awesome, right? I personally am not one of those lawyers. I like to be, the way I'm happiest is when I have different issues that I get to confront every single day. And sometimes, the wonderful thing about this practice is that you've got policy issues, you've got litigation issues, you've got transactional issues, you've got, international relations issues, geopolitical issues. You've got to deal with regulators, you've got to deal with, clients, you've got to deal with state people, federal people, international people. You can, come speak on panels about different, aspects of your practice. There's a whole national security side to this, which has really only become prominent in the last couple of years, just to be perfectly honest. CFIUS, which is a government body that reviews foreign direct investment in the United States, kind of a moribund entity until about a couple of years ago. Now it's a huge practice. There's trade, as we said at the outset, international trade dimensions to all this. If you're interested in the world, a cyber practice is really, a unique way to touch all of those points in a way that you would never do if you were just, an M&A lawyer or just an arbitration lawyer. So, the diversity of practice is what I find most fulfilling.
I concur. 100%. Yep, exactly. It's the diversity of the practice always. And what's related to that is I'm always learning. I always have more to learn. And I've been doing pretty much exclusively privacy and cybersecurity law for well over a decade. And there's an important new thing that I'm learning literally every week. Like just yesterday, I learned about this EU payments regulation rule that requires notification within 4 hours of an incident. Something I haven't really had to deal with, but I just learned about it. And I've been doing data breaches for a long time, but I haven't run across this particular rule. And it's kind of, wow, a wild card, 4 hours. And I'm complaining about the 36-hour notice of proposed rulemaking proposal, from the Fed. But yeah, I'm still going to complain about that. But yeah, so, you learn something new every day. And then I would say, even though I'm constantly learning, I feel good helping clients. I feel good when I bring value. And I feel appreciated by my clients because this is such a specialized area. Sometimes it's very overwhelming for our clients. These issues are so big and complex and new. And so they often come, they are seeking to learn also to understand, put concreteness around these issues. And when you can help them do that, you feel appreciated, you added value. And that feels good. It feels good to do that kind of work and establish those relationships with our clients and feel like you're good at what you're doing and you're still learning. And that's, a wonderful feeling.
I think both of you might persuade everyone at Georgetown to become cyber lawyers after hearing this talk. And with that, we'll open it to our students who have been sending me a lot of great questions, but it's better if you ask them yourself. So our wonderful live audience, please raise your hand and we'll get the conversation started. We'll start off with you, Lisa.
Yeah, hi. Thank you guys so much for doing this. I'm just curious, technology is changing so fast. How do you keep up with trends, with new products, and just the news in general? Like, what sources do you turn to? And as students who are interested in the field, what should we be reading every day?
That's a great question. I'm sure Colleen, having been in the field for longer and frankly being the founder of our blog at Sidley, will have a lot to say on this. I'll just say you're asking exactly the right question, because that is one area that has fundamentally changed since when I was in law school. Now there is a proliferation of blogs, of non-official periodicals. You don't have to sit there waiting for a law review. There are so many sort of industry publications out there that are so useful. So, in my own experience, I like Lawfare because it covers technology and national security issues. I read Recode, which is a tech periodical. What else? There are a couple things that you might have access to as students. The IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, is kind of a standard industry group. They've got a daily newsletter, which is incredibly helpful. Politico has a great, tech blog, which you should have access to maybe as students. Otherwise, I think you have to pay for it. But it's another great way to keep up with what's going on in Washington and around the world. Colleen, I'm sure, has plenty more that are more useful.
I would add BNA, Bloomberg BNA has good digest on privacy and cyber issues, as does Law 360, as does the ABA Antitrust and Consumer Protection section. I would also say that the New York Times Bit blog is one of my favorites. I like, and they've done a lot of really good reporting in the New York Times on these privacy issues. In fact, sometimes they're creating the privacy conversation. They did some really tremendous reporting in 2018 about the re-identifiability of data from apps and geolocation data from apps. And that was really important. And so, that's good stuff. Also, there's a lot of really good podcasts on the cybersecurity side. I'd say the CDT, Center for Democracy and Technology, does a lot of really good stuff, as well as EPIC. The CDT and EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, have materials and podcasts. I was listening to a really great podcast for a while that I really liked. That was like the inside story on data security, kind of cutting edge cyber issues. Hold on, I'll have to. Let me see, where is it in my list? See all, what's up next? Yes, Darknet Diaries. I'm a big fan of Darknet Diaries. They're really interesting. The IAPP also has a podcast that I found really interesting. But I like Darknet Diaries because I like finding out what's the latest in kind of the white hat hacker world, because especially if you do data breaches, what's the next thing, and how some of these incidents came about. They do really amazing reporting. So there's so many sources, but if you were to just pick three, I would say IAPP is number one, and I think they might have student discounts for memberships, and really they are really critical in this space. I would say Lawfare, and then I would pick one that you think is fun to read. What do you like to read and listen to? Because then you're more likely to stay on top of it, and then you'll have good conversations for recruiting interviews and networking events.
Thank you so much.
All right, next we have a question from Tanya.
Hi, thank you for being here. I just had a question about the 1L summer experience, and if you guys had any suggestions for what students might be looking to for getting experience over the 1L summer, just sort of keeping in mind that I think positions with the regulators are really competitive. So if a student couldn't get the optimal opportunity, what are some of the opportunities that are less trafficked or less known that you would recommend? Thanks.
Sujit, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can take a shot at it. That is a great question. I think there are, if an opportunity in the government or an enforcement agency isn't available, you might consider some of the nonprofits that are in the space. So, CDT, EFF, ACLU has a very strong, digital rights program. And, across the political spectrum. I mean, there are folks on the liberal side, there are folks on the conservative side who are working on these issues. I'm sure they would, if you're in a position to work for free, and I know not everyone is, but if you are, that's the kind of thing that I would imagine, coming out of Georgetown Law School, any of these institutions, many of which are based here in DC, although these days that's less relevant because of, remote work. There's a lot of opportunities and a lot of really great organizations that are doing work in the space. That's what I would suggest, but again, Colleen might have better ideas.
Yeah, and I would throw out there one kind of underutilized option, which I took advantage of, and frankly might have made my career. When I was a 1L, I was waitressing. I waitressed my way through law school, and so I was waitressing during the days, and especially my 1L summer quite a lot to save up. And at nights, I was working as a research assistant for Professor Anita Allen, Dr. Allen, at a University of Pennsylvania. She was our privacy professor. She's also a doctor of ethics. Phenomenal woman, phenomenal, professor and professional and thought leader on these issues. And she was rewriting her privacy law textbook. So I, didn't get the firm positions that I was looking for my 1L summer. And frankly, I needed to make some money. So this was really flexible for me. It allowed me to work in the evenings or in the day, depending on my shift. And then I had this great resume line that I was the research assistant to Dr. Allen on the privacy law textbook. That gave me my talking point for my interviews. And frankly, I learned a lot that summer, just helping update citations and just going through all of that on the textbook. And there's a lot of professors that are doing work in this space that there might be an opportunity. And so, academia is also a possibility, because really what you're looking for is get more exposure on some issue that you're interested in, try to build your skills and build your resume and have that talking point that continues to further your career and, help you market yourself when you do graduate.
That's great. And Ian, we'll have a question from you.
Hi, Dale. Thanks for being here. So both of you have talked about how diverse the practice is when you're a privacy and cybersecurity and a cyber lawyer. I'm curious if there has been an industry that has been most surprising that you've worked with or that you've had dealings with.
I can answer that as a former government lawyer. I've only been at Sidley for 3 months, so Colleen would have a much better idea of sort of how different sectors of industry deal with privacy issues. As a government lawyer, so much of my my job, particularly toward the end of my tenure at the Justice Department, was working with the tech industry on access to data issues, and that was a really interesting and formative experience for me, because on the one hand, we ran into certain companies, and I say this, they meant it. They wanted to protect their users' privacy at all costs, and that's the business decision. It's one I respect. It's one that if you're in law enforcement, you can't just accept at face value, because there were a lot of people who have child pornography on their phones, or there are terrorists who use communications platforms to do really bad things. And so, when I was a law enforcement official, the idea that privacy would sort of trump everything else was not a legitimate, position. And there were cases where the Justice Department took prominent companies to court over that proposition, right? So that was one aspect of the practice that I found very interesting, was to see how companies had to deal with demands of access to information by the government. And particularly in a post-Snowden era, that relationship became very interesting. And it changed again after 2016 and the Russian interference in the elections, when for a long time, the tech industry, in particular the social media companies, had said basically, we're going to push the US government back after the Snowden revelations. We want to show that we're independent. We're not stooges. We're not tools of the NSA. But after the 2016 elections, it became very clear that there had to be a partnership between the intelligence community and the law enforcement folks and the social media companies. Because if you don't have that relationship, you've got trolls who just take over the entire system and bring all of our, all of our freedoms into potential problem. So for me, having lived through, literally from Snowden all the way through, that was really interesting to see. The same people who were very adverse to me at one point were trying to become my best friends at a later point. And now, of course, I'm in private practice and I want them to be my clients. So it's a very interesting set of dynamics. I will just say that. And when you throw in the international dimension to some of this, whether it's how US companies posture themselves against foreign governments and how they treat foreign governments related to the US government is one very interesting aspect. And the second aspect is, you've got international companies, I won't mention any names, but that are trying to grow their market share. And, they may not share the same values that American companies might share, particularly in the tech area, in the communications area. And again, so I'm not going to get into any more details than that, but that to me was also a very interesting dynamic, is how do other companies that are, in this space and are at the cutting edge of innovation, just like American companies are, how do they approach trying to grow their business and grow their networks and bring more customers onto their platforms? How do they deal with data? To whom are they sending the data? Who do they share it with? What are the protections? To me, that over the last 5-6 years has been the most interesting and fascinating thing. And these companies are run by real people. They've got executives who, they make decisions. And how one company makes a decision is often very different than how a different company makes a decision. And being part of that, sometimes from an adverse point of view as a government official, and now as someone counseling these very senior executives, that has really just been fascinating from my perspective. So that's my answer.
That's great, Sujit. I love that. Yeah. I will throw out a few things I have found really interesting when I get out of left field, an out of left field kind of client. I've never done work in that industry before, and I have to quickly get up to speed on what their data issues and understand their business. So for example, a few months back, I was dealing with a company in the energy sector, and then, and they had a ransomware attack threatening to take down their system, where you could have, potential nuclear issues, and having to get law enforcement involved, and having to take a step back and be like, okay, I have to understand how power plants work now, and diving into that and understanding the regulatory regime for that particular client, which is not something that I day-to-day do. We get the opportunity to partner with some of our other regulatory, colleagues who are energy, attorneys, and kind of work together on that, which is really exciting, and then deal with that issue. Similarly, sometimes, and this is kind of old news, but, a few years back when I started getting calls from those traditional manufacturing, industrial manufacturing companies that, have made widgets all their history, suddenly becoming a tech company and getting into the industrial Internet of Things, and thinking about how they're going to do that and learning how they're going to convert their technologies and convert their products, and what that might mean is really interesting, because you have to dive into this whole new thing. That's similar with, we have startup clients sometimes, and they're always so innovative, and you get on a call and you're like, you're doing what? You can do that? How? And you have to learn this new technology. Oftentimes it's relating to artificial intelligence and what machine learning can, what doors machine learning may be able to open. And you have to think not just about the law, but about the ethical issues too. You have to go beyond the law oftentimes to advise clients that are on the leading edge of technology. And so, I love those kinds of clients where I'm like, whoa, what's this about? And you have to learn something entirely new, which is really exciting. Yeah.
Great. We'll try to wrap up with our last two questions, starting with Alan.
Hey, thanks so much for being here. We've enjoyed the stimulating discussion. For those of us interested in the area where constitutional law and cyber intersect, what sorts of conflicts have you been able to work on, or do you foresee coming up between Fourth Amendment, privacy, and technology such as like Amazon Alexa or Ring, the security door camera? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can't speak to any client issues, and we will not be speaking to any named entities to start. But the intersections, I think we can just brainstorm, Sujit, on this. I'll throw out, the Fourth Amendment stuff is what drew me to privacy law. Women's rights issues, LGBT rights issues are what drew me big. That's what I started, my privacy law journey on. And so I was really interested in those issues, and they do still come up. The Fourth Amendment issues came up very early on in some of our work for a pro bono client, where there were questions about cooperating with the government and what makes a private entity kind of a government actor, and what risks can go along with that. And now that there's more private-public partnerships, I wonder if we're going to see more of that, those kinds of issues. But Sujit, I'm sure, can speak a lot to these.
Yeah, no, I would echo everything Colleen said. Typically the constitutional issues arise in the context of criminal prosecutions, because often what ends up happening is law enforcement wants to use an innovative tool to go do something. They, obviously review it internally. They get the sign off and they go do it. And then typically somebody gets arrested. And as part of the litigation around can the evidence be used or not, that's where the Fourth Amendment issue gets sort of joined, right? So, it's hard to predict, partly because the technology is so innovative, right? I mean, it's been publicly reported that, the government uses what are called network investigative techniques, where they essentially install code after getting a warrant from a neutral judge to track, let's say, child predators. That issue has now been litigated, but it was very controversial at the time, because it basically sounds like you've got the government introducing malware. But the reason why the government is introducing malware is because all of this stuff is happening on the dark web. Traditional investigative techniques were not available because people were using Tor, or they're using other obfuscating measures so that traditional subpoena authority wouldn't work. And so the government's going to evolve just like the criminals evolve. And often part of that evolution is using these really cool kind of untested technological innovations. That's often where the Fourth Amendment issues arise, is because then somebody gets caught and then you start litigating over it. So that's often where the constitutional issues arise. But look, I mean, we live in a moment right now where people think about the Fourth Amendment. Don't forget about the First Amendment. And we're in a moment right now where the sort of interactions between technology platforms, First Amendment, they're not state actors, but I mean, some people have said they're basically public utilities, right? Because if you lose your Twitter voice, I mean, now that's where a lot of people get their news. It's how a lot of people get the message out. There's a real conversation happening right now on a constitutional dimension. And then, you take it international. We have a First Amendment. In Europe, there is no First Amendment. And so how European governments regulate speech is very different than how we do. And yet we've got, companies that are supranational, right? Every one of the big American tech companies is present in Europe and is often the market leader. So they've got to find ways to deal with a very different legal regime that in many ways is kind of pushing the envelope on First Amendment issues, on privacy issues. So there's, I think, a lot to be kind of thought through, is when you've got these different legal, regimes coming together, what holds them together and what are ways that you can sort of pull them apart. That's where I think a lot of the most interesting constitutional issues arise.
And they're so alive, right? Almost every term we have a Fourth Amendment case going on, it feels like. That's really, there these, because the technology is changing, certainly, but Fourth Amendment law is evolving, every term. And
Alan, some further good news for you is, like Colleen, I work through law school. and my day job is at the Georgetown Center for the Constitution. And so we are planning events for the Cyberlaw Society that ask these very questions, so stay tuned. And I will once again, I say that I've muted myself. I posted, right, it always happens, that I posted a link to our website, and that's where all of our events will be posted. So you can register, sign up for them, and propose them to us. We are always open to ideas. I saw that we had another question. Has the question been retracted? Because if so, then we can end now, unless anyone else has any further comments or questions for our wonderful panelists today. There we go. Kenton is back. All right, Kenton, what's your question?
All right. Yeah, I'll try to be quick because I don't want to hold anybody over. I used to work at Sidley on the same floor as Colleen for 2 years. I don't know if you remember me, but hi.
I was thinking you looked familiar. I was looking.
Yeah, I shared an office with Alex Tritel, who was like your assistant for all that stuff. I was gonna say, it's funny that you said people were laughing at Alan Roll back then, because I edited a memo once that listed his bill rate, and I don't think anyone's laughing anymore. It's kind of insane.
Indeed.
But what I wanted to ask about was, there's been a lot of like unfocused political ire lately, and a lot of highly publicized data leaks. But are there any regulations you anticipate coming up soon, or anything that would change in this current administration?
Do you want to talk about breach legislation in 230?
So, I mean, Kenton, it's a great question. Section 230 is something that's obviously very much on people's minds. I think there is going to be some kind of push. I think there has to be. There have been a number of bills that have been circulating on the Hill. And now that we have somewhat unified government, right, one party in control of, Congress and the presidency, at least in theory, there should be some movement. Now, what's going to actually happen, I think, is very difficult to say, because there are nuances in the Section 230 conversation that, it's very hard to find a coalition that can bring everyone together. But I do think it's going to be very active. On data breach legislation, that too has been floated for a number of years. There was a pretty concrete proposal that actually the Justice Department introduced last year. It got some legs, but it wasn't very highly publicized because there was a broader conversation about privacy legislation generally, kind of national privacy legislation that the Commerce Committee was looking at. I suspect, again, all of that stuff will be resuscitated with the new Congress. The question is, it takes time. You got to first, confirm all of the executive branch people. That takes time. Then you're going to have other crises that come up. And this kind of work takes sustained attention, right? You can't just throw a bill together. You've got to really have hearings, bring people in, work on it. So I suspect it's going to be on the agenda. Does it get done is a much more difficult question. But now is probably a more urgent time than I've seen in the recent past. But Colleen, again, would I'm sure have views on that as well.
I agree. I mean, I've been holding my breath for over a decade for national privacy legislation, or some sort of federal standard on breach notifications. I'm getting a little jaded on the possibility of comprehensive legislation, but I'm hopeful. I also recognize that while this is a bipartisan issue, there's some really critical roadblocks on 230. Getting the right coalition for the right for consensus on issues is going to be difficult. Similarly, on privacy legislation, in preemption and the scope of a private right of action will continue to be an issue. I don't know that they're going to be solved so quickly. And I also recognize that I think that there are going to be some significant other priorities for legislative action in 2021. And so while I think it will continue to percolate, it's been percolating for a decade, and I'm not a betting woman, but I wouldn't bet on it.